everybody at One Life. I'm going to start before I go into my main topic here in a moment. I need to do a couple of things. One of them is kind of irrelevant and dumb. That's where we'll start. And that way, in case you don't get anything else, you can say, hey, we talked about something irrelevant and dumb today. I was in the Verizon store just this past week, and I happened to walk in there in my cool new shoes that my wife bought me as she's helping me along in my midlife crisis, okay? So these are gold Chucks that shouldn't be worn by a 53-year-old guy, but they are. And I went in there and I was talking to the guy about my phone and everything. He noticed my shoes. Hey, cool shoes. And then it came up that I was a preacher and all that I do and everything. He said, would you preach in those? I said, I guess. I don't really know. The clothing standard we have at my church is that we be clothed. That's kind of pretty much, yeah. And he said, well, would you do, I mean, really, would you do? Yeah. And he said, would you do it this Sunday? And I said, sure, that's fine, And he said, and then take a picture of yourself doing it. So we're getting the picture here. I'm going to send him the video, and I'm really proud that I'm going to preach in my new cool gold Chucks. All right. So, and then every time you see them, just think he really is going through a midlife crisis, isn't he? It's just kind of a bummer. I'm waiting for my wife to buy me a Harley. That's the next step. Now, the second thing, a little bit more serious, but we are going to be talking foundationally really about prayer today, prayer and worship out of the Psalms. And one of the things that the New Testament tells us is that we are, as a church, we're supposed to be praying for our government leaders. Well, it's been a really, really interesting week over the past week. And whichever side of the aisle you happen to be on, what happened basically was the current administration decided to, in dealing with the immigration stuff that's going on, they decided to discourage it by separating children from their parents. And a number of voices, including prominent Christian leaders, said, hey, don't get the kids involved with it. Don't traumatize children. And there was a lot of voice, and I love about our country is that it's of the people, by the people, for the people. So as the people spoke, our president did kind of leave that particular course that he was on. But we're in a place where we probably ought to go ahead and pray for these things, because the Bible does say to pray for government leaders and pray that they would make decisions that lead to peace. Because I've been involved, and we're going to talk a little bit about this here in a moment. I've been involved in countries that don't have a lot of peace, and we do not want that. And with all our arguments and debates and everything else, we want our government leaders making decisions that lead in that direction. So I'm going to ask everybody across all our campuses to join me in a prayer for our government, and just as we deal with these complex issues. Father, in Jesus' name, thank you very, very much for this place. I thank you often because I get to live in a place that's able to prosper and pursue opportunity and just pursue happiness, as our founders said. And I know there's a lot of people in this world that want to be here. But Lord, you know all the complexities with that. I pray that you will give our government leaders a real insight into where we can provide asylum and safety and encouragement and opportunity like my own descendants had. And at the same time, be sensitive to that which is just and that which is legal and everything else. And so I pray that you'll give a lot of insight and bring peace to our country. Thank you that we get to have a voice in all these things. We love you, and we ask for the rest of this time to be very beneficial and helpful to all. And we're just kind of submitting that to you on a local level and a federal level and everything else. In Jesus' name, amen. So we are talking about prayer today primarily. I think most Christian people know that prayer is kind of this, really the most foundational of all of the practices that you're supposed to be doing as a Christian. And some of you are very into it, you've got it locked. And when I say prayer, I'm not just talking about, when you're sitting in the Chick-fil-A drive-thru and praying that, oh God, help it speed up. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the practice of setting aside a time in your day where you interact with God and you pray and you seek Him, that kind of stuff. And some of you are good at that. Some of you feel really, really guilty right now that I'm even bringing it up. As a matter of fact, and you've tried at different times. Have you ever tried this before? You've been praying and you start off, oh dear God, and then somehow your mind ends up saying, do we have enough milk? Should I run by the store? You ever had your mind wander on you before when you're praying? Or how about this one? Here's a great plan for your prayer time. I'm going to pray that 15-minute to a half-hour block right before I go to bed. As a matter of fact, I'm going to pray from bed. That's what I'm going to do. And oh, dear God, and that's it. That's the last you remember. And then I know there's also this one. Have you ever showed up in prayer and just said, dear God, bless that person on Facebook that wanted prayer, and you really don't even know what to say. You ever just kind of not had it much to say? Well, we started a couple of weeks ago this current series that we're in. It's called Mixtape, and it's a study and exploration of the Psalms. And what I said at that time is that I'm not above begging you to pray the Psalms as a way to pick out the summer and just make that your prayer life. And there's a lot of reasons why. The number one is Jesus did it. Jesus would have known the Psalms, was conversant with the Psalms, and memorized the Psalms, and used them as his prayer. And so that ought to be enough. But it also helps you with those practical challenges. If you ever run out of things to say, or you don't have content, or your mind wanders, I know it can feel funny to think, reading a prayer, does that even work? Well, apparently it does if Jesus does it, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna study Psalm 31. And I'm gonna read it here in just a moment. And one of the reasons I did it, there's several reasons I wanted to look at this one, is that it's a very typical psalm, and it's very easy to grab a hold of it and make it your prayer. So what I wanna do is I wanna kind of show how that would look if you were praying it and comment kind of through it. And then we're gonna look at the actual content. And there's one particular idea towards the end that I really want everybody to get if they don't get anything else in the course of it. So imagine yourself, you're in your house, you've got your cup of coffee or whatever else, or wherever you like to pray. And Psalm 31 starts like this. It says, for the director of music, Psalm of David. We always have to remember we're reading song lyrics, and so there was a little bit more emotion there. But just picture in your mind and go ahead and let these be your words. In you, Lord, I have taken refuge. Let me never be put to shame. You know, that's a very common line in the Psalms. Let me never be put to shame. I think it's interesting. They were concerned about that. Deliver me in your righteousness. Turn your ear to me. Come quickly to my rescue. You ever wanted God to kind of hurry up? Come quickly to my rescue. Well, go ahead and use that. Be my rock of refuge, a strong fortress to save me. Since you are my rock and my fortress, for the sake of your name, lead and guide me. There's a great one. For the sake of your name, lead and guide me. What a great line. Keep me free from the trap that is set for me, for you are my refuge. Into your hands I commit my spirit. Keep your eyes on that line. Deliver me, Lord, my faithful God. I hate those who cling to worthless idols. Now I want to stop right there. Every now and then the Psalms will have you saying something, you're like, what, should I be saying that? I hate those who cling to worthless idols. I'm not even going to comment much else, but here's the thing. You'll stay engaged. You won't get sleepy on that one because you'll at least be asking yourself the question, am I supposed to be praying this? I thought I wasn't supposed to hate anybody, and you'll be interacting with it. And you can talk to God about that stuff. As for me, I trust in the Lord. I will be glad and rejoice in your love. For you saw my affliction and knew the anguish of my soul. You've not given me into the hands of the enemy, but have set my feet in a spacious place. Be merciful to me, Lord, for I am in distress. My eyes grow weak with sorrow, my soul and body with grief. My life is consumed by anguish, and my years by groaning. My strength fails because of my affliction, and my bones grow weak. He might be having a worse day than you are at this point. Because of my enemies, I am the utter contempt of my neighbors and an object of dread to my closest friends. Those who see me on the street flee from me. He probably is having a worse day than you. I am forgotten as though I were dead. I am become like broken pottery, for I hear many whispering, terror on every side. They conspire against me and plot to take my life. But I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hands. Deliver me from the hands of my enemies, from those who pursue me. Now we've left out a few verses, not very many, but I want to skip down to verse 19. How abundant are the good things that you have stored up for those who fear you, that you bestow in the sight of all. On those who take refuge in you. In the shelter of your presence, you hide them from all human intrigues. You keep them safe in your dwelling from accusing tongues. Praise be to the Lord, for he showed me the wonders of his love. When I was in a city under siege, in my alarm, I said, I'm cut off from your sight. He admits to being afraid. Yet you heard my cry for mercy when I called to you for help. Love the Lord, all his faithful people. The Lord preserves those who are true to him, but the proud he pays back in full. And I love the way it closes out right before he goes back into his day. Be strong and take heart, all you who hope in the Lord. It's like he's talking to himself at that point. Okay, so here's the deal. What this psalm does, it's a very typical one, but what it helps us see is what I have now affectionately and creatively have named the psalm cycle, okay? And I am going to go to the whiteboard today, and I'm going to show you a few things from this psalm that is very typical of those that I have called this psalm cycle that you will see, and I call it that because you will see this same pattern over and over and over again. And I think the reason it's so important to get it is because around here, we say we worship extravagantly. What does that even mean? Well, I would maintain it means multidimensionally. It means according to the pattern that you actually see in the Bible. That's what it means to worship extravagantly. And the first thing out, you'll notice, on the cycle is rescue. Rescue. This is a psalm of asking for rescue. You ever done that before? One of the most common words used in the Psalms is help. You ever prayed one of those before? I need help. I need rescue. You just kind of throw down and say, please get me out of this mess. And you can see that pattern in there. And God does it. We've all got stories of where we thought something was going to enter disastrous, going to be kind of a disastrous for our lives, and we get out of it, if you will. And we've all had those kind of prayers. Now, I know a number of times I've referenced a place in my life several years ago where I took my family at that time to Kabul, Afghanistan. But I don't think I've told this particular story before to this crowd. We went there, and I took my wife and my 3 kids. My oldest was 13, my youngest was 6. And we went there for a month. And obviously a dangerous place. And here's how my psychology went. My psychology was I really believed it was the right thing to do. I still do. And I was fired up about it. And we're going to go there and we're going to reach the people of Afghanistan and help them and all that sort of stuff. But when I got there, and my family's there and we've been getting ready, about 2 days in, I went from being really fired up about it to being like, what have I done to myself and to my family? I've put my kids at risk, and I started panicking. Well, before I had left, I was praying the Psalms. I had just kind of started in Psalm 1. I was making my way through. And I remember the morning I prayed Psalm 31 because I was in this place of, what have I done? I put my kids in harm's way and everything else. And there was one line, and here's I learned a couple things at that time. I learned, first of all, that people in the Bible, sometimes we struggle with all this enemy stuff and traps laid for them and all that. They really encountered that kind of thing. And I remember it felt that way. You see, in Kabul, Afghanistan, sometimes it's hard for us to relate in our suburban America where we've got our really, really cool privacy fences up and our nice yards and everything else. You know what most of the place looks like in Afghanistan? I'm going to show you a picture of the walls that have razor wire on them. And this is around the homes. This is not just around businesses and things like that. If you're in a home, you're typically behind a wall like that. And I remember how constricted it felt. And if they've got razor wire up and they have things that block bombs from going off, you're in kind of a dangerous place. And so I had this feeling of, oh God, please. But it gave me verbiage to say. And then came along that line, you have not given me in the hands of my enemies, but have set my feet in a spacious place. And for whatever reason, because I guess it was the opposite of what I was experiencing, you have set, and it said it like in the future, my feet in a spacious place. There was something about that just kind of set my heart free. I was like, you have set my feet in a spacious place. Even if I'm not experiencing right now, you've set my feet in a spacious place. Well, everything went fine, and a month later we left, and we stopped in Dubai for a couple of days. And if you know anything about Dubai, you do actually. If you've ever been to the mall, and if you've ever been to the beach, you've been to Dubai, all right? That's what it is. And we went to a beach, and you can't get more spacious than a beach because you have the beach, and you have what seems like endless water in the ocean. And I snapped this picture of my kids because I never forgot that moment. And I have this in my home, and it says, you have not handed me over to the enemy, but have set my feet in a spacious place. Now, the reason I tell you that is not to, I think, check me out. It's more of these things can be alive to you if you'll allow them to be. That God really does do the rescue operations. And that moment always stuck with me. That's why I converted that picture into a thing I put on my wall. I will always remember that line, that moment, that thing where somehow God had shown me in advance, he set my feet on a spacious place. He'd rescued me. But here's the problem. There's another part of the cycle. And it goes like this. It is the pessimist's guide to miracles. And I put this one second on purpose. You see, the problem with being rescued from anything and God doing some cool thing or a miracle or whatever else, you know what it assumes? There's a tacit admission inside any miracle or any deliverance or any rescue that you had to be rescued from something, right? There has to be trouble before there can be rescue. Rescue by nature is something that requires, you got to be rescued from something. You have to be in danger. And you'll see repeatedly in the Psalms this pattern of, yeah, they get rescued, but you can tell this guy's complete. There's enemies setting traps for me. I've got a problem. You see, and the reason that's very important to point out is because, and I know none of us would really say this, we're not shallow enough to say this out loud, but I think we say this in the back of our mind somewhere, that we all have accepted as adults. We all know that life carries trouble. But I think we think in terms of inconvenience type trouble. We know that we're going to have a day where we have taken our family to Holiday World on the same exact day that everybody in this basic area of the country has taken their family to Holiday World, right? And the heat index is something like 212 degrees, so right around in there. You know, we've picked that day, and we're all kind of prepared for that level of trouble. But I really do think in the back of my mind, I know I've done this, because whenever real trouble comes, that we kind of think that if God loves me and he's got a wonderful plan for my life, the real trouble of life, the hard stuff, the tragic stuff, is not in the plan. And the problem is, as you read the Psalms, you see a cycle where they go ahead and say it does happen. Matter of fact, one of my favorite stories in the Bible is a passage in Acts chapter 3. The church is young and it's just kind of started out, and the guy Peter, the leaders, Peter and John, are walking along, and they see a guy who's been lame, and it says from birth. Lame from birth. He looks up at them and they say, in Jesus' name, get up. And he gets up and he's strengthened. It says he was dancing and he was leaping and he was jumping. He was doing all that stuff. In Acts chapter 4, though, you know what it says? That he had been lame from birth, but he was over 40 years old. Now, I don't want to take away from the miracle. I don't want to be Mr. Debbie Downer here. But the point is this. He was born that way, and he had lived that way for 40 years before that deliverance came along. Now that kind of messes with your mind. I don't know if it does you, but it does me. And you could take it a step further, that he had been there for 40 years, and that means Jesus himself had gone that same exact way, had passed him up. I mean, that gets into timing issues, that gets into what was going on there. Did he not yell enough? Did Jesus just kind of pass him up on purpose? How does that work? The point is this: there will be trouble. But when there's trouble, here's the other thing. I'm going to abbreviate here. The other thing is this, that the psalmists do, that's critically important. That's abbreviation for description, by the way. If you're taking notes, please do. That's what that is. Description. Did you notice in the middle, I started feeling uncomfortable because I was convinced, I even commented on this, I was convinced that probably most of us aren't having as nearly as bad of a day as this guy is. I mean, he talked about his friends. He says his friends, he comes down the street and they avoid him. Most of us, he talked about being sick. Most of us, when we're sick, we at least get a visit in the hospital or something. He's saying, when I come my friend's way, they're ducking out. Did you hear that line where he says, I've become like broken pottery? Let's think about that. What does he mean by that? That's a poetic image. Think about broken pottery. You ever felt like broken pottery? Broken pottery is what? Useless. It's kind of a broken pottery. No one saves broken pottery. Broken pottery just kind of gets thrown in the trash. Here's what's so important about the psalmist that they do, that we have to get, and we've said it in here before, but I'll say it again, is they give artistic expression to this. And they say it to God. They say things. Did you hear the word? He said affliction. He said the word anguish. It's translated anguish. You ever use the word? I mean, anguish is one of those words that we kind of save in a box. We hardly, when's the last time he brought out the word, I'm in anguish? I mean, that's hardcore, deep stuff. He talked about being like the living dead, as it were. Here's how that functions. Have you ever noticed that when you're really going through a hard time, that there's two ways to express it? One is when you kind of say it politely. Yeah, things have been a little bit rough, and you kind of say it with some social decorum. But have you ever been in a place where you finally, I was with a counselor not real long ago, and I wasn't giving counseling, I was getting counseling, okay? And he made the comment to me, he said, last week was the first time you really got real with me. I'm like, what the heck is that supposed to mean? He said, I don't know, just the way you expressed yourself was different. And what I had done, I had been expressing trouble politely, analytically. But the week prior, I'd finally you ever done that thing where it's just like, bleh, and you just kind of, yeah, that's exactly right. Bleh. You ever done that? Yeah, we've all done that. But I mean, word-wise. And you've really just pulled the pin on the grenade and you've let out what you really are thinking. You're not holding anything back. You're just kind of emoting. And do you ever notice how that shifts the conversation and it shifts your own heart? See, the psalmists do that, and then they take it a step further. Remember, these are poets. These are songwriters. I think David, the writer, he probably looked at this time where he was up at 2 o'clock in the morning begging and saying, my bones are aching. I'm in trouble. My enemies are after me. I am in trouble. And it feels like broken pottery. He probably just got those things out in an improvised form. But then later, he went and picked out words and handed them to the people of God. And God handed them to the people of God. And and they'll have one of few effects. Sometimes when you're going through a good season, you'll look at the psalmist and go, man, you need some counseling. I'm doing a lot better than that. Sometimes you'll be going through kind of a dark period and you'll think, well, I don't have it that bad. Then other times you'll think, oh, this gave me just the right words that I didn't even have myself. Now here's why that's so important, and this is extravagant worship. It's because it is absolutely crucial. The Psalms teach us over and over and over again that it's about walking with God. The psalmist talked about these things toward God, because the alternative is dangerous. Here's the alternative. You will talk about God in your own mind. Sometimes you get in trouble and you're not talking to God, you're talking about him in your head or with your friends. And if you do that, a lot of times that will lead to disillusionment, it will lead to doubt, it will lead to struggle that goes far beyond and will create distance. And what the psalmists teach us by giving us these words is that they're doing it towards God. Even though they're saying, I feel like broken pottery, at least they're saying it to him. And so they're relating to him in the process. And the difference could not be more stark and more important. So wherever you are today, some of you, there has to be across 3 campuses, some of you are right here. Describe it. Say what it feels like. Use the Psalms to give you expression of it. And it will lead, in all but a couple of the Psalms, it will lead to the next thing, and that is the language of trust. But I trust in your unfailing love. It will lead to the language of trust. Why? Because you're in relationship. That's why. And there's a couple Psalms that never make it to this, but most of them do. Most of them. Now here's why I put it in a cycle form though. Instead of okay, this is kind of the thing when you get in trouble and then you're out. The longer I've walked with God and the older I get, I'm sorry, about the time you got here, you're going to go here and you're going to go back here. And that's not to be a pessimist, that's just to be how it's walked out. in worship. Now, here's the next thing that comes up. And really, you know, the real reason I picked this psalm was not so I could tell that little story about my kids in Afghanistan. It was actually, as I've prayed the Psalms and gone through them a number of times, I've noticed a word that they use a lot. It's the word refuge. And and I looked it up. In the English, it comes up 43 times in my English Bible. 43 times they use the word refuge. And then I was curious which psalm uses it the most. Where is it most highly concentrated? That's Psalm 31. It's used 4 times. And so that concept, the psalmists call God a refuge, be a refuge, be a refuge, be a refuge all the time. Why do they do that? Because this looks different from time to time. Here's what I mean by that. Sometimes God puts you on the beach in Dubai. It gets you out of the circumstances. That's the rescue. That's the one we're looking for, actually. I need a rescue. I got out of the danger. All's good. I'm back on to life. But the psalmists, the Bible, and experience will teach you it's not always that way. See, I believe the rescue always comes, but it's not always in the circumstantial form. Sometimes God gives the rescue, but I put it this way. Sometimes he is the rescue. You see, you'll notice that the psalmist opened up and he said, be a refuge to me. You are my refuge. Not you give me a refuge, like, hey, I've got this nice beach in Dubai for you to go to. They actually call God a refuge. Think about that for a minute. Now, David is the writer. That's why that's important. And David, among other things, was a warrior. And I'm talking about the Braveheart days. I'm talking about where they were swinging battle axes and clubs and javelins. He had been on a battlefield many times where there was someone with adrenaline rushing looking at him who wanted to kill him with a blunt force trauma, okay? Right, that's what, he had been through that. He had been in battlefields where he had seen arrows flying around. And so the language of refuge was something that he knew deeply. He had run to cave openings, you know. He had one guy, we'll talk about this next week, and one guy who was out to murder him, tried to chase him down, and he would find caves to hide in, and they became what? Refuges, hiding places. And what's a refuge? It's a few things. Number one, it's other. It's other than you. It's something where you're not bearing the burden of it. You're no longer exposed. Something else is taking the arrows. It's a place where you're not in open danger. It's a place where you can have peace and relax a little bit. Be inside a place where danger's still out there. But they say God himself is the refuge. And that's sometimes the rescue that God wants you to experience. I got to sit, when I was in Kabul a few years back, I got to sit in the living room of a man who was a great guy, and he was doing really neat work there. And he had his wife, and he was 2 teenage kids there. And we met, and we were even talking about working with him and everything else, and we ate dinner and went on. And then we saw on CNN that same family, the mom had gone down the street to work at a medical clinic. And when she came back, the Taliban had gone into that house and shot and killed her husband and her 2 teenage kids. Now, when you see something like that, you're like, whoa, wait a minute, where's this? And here's what I heard in the language as I've listened to the woman talk. She actually has a book out about it. It's this. Listen to her words. Because we had received a very clear call from God, we knew we had a mandate to live and work there in Afghanistan. We knew we had chosen a dangerous land in which we live in which to live and work. People should not go with their children to Afghanistan and live and work if they do not have a clear call from God. We had to count the cost of obedience. But since this has happened, what I know, and I can't answer all the questions, but what I can say is my relationship with God has gone to whole new levels that I never imagined before. What's she saying? You know what refuge is? Refuge is relationship. Do you remember that line I said, watch for this one. It says, into your hands I commit my spirit. Remember that one? It's almost a throwaway if you're just reading the Psalms, and many of you may know this, but it comes up one other time. It's in Luke 23. It said, it was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 a.m, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out in a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. When he said this, he breathed his last. Incidentally, when I asked you to pray the Psalms, we're not asking you to do some lightweight, shallow thing. Jesus' last words before he died, he was quoting and praying the Psalms, which is probably pretty good stuff. His last words. But I was wondering about refuge. What does it really mean? We talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we introduced the Psalms. What did we say? In Psalm chapter 1, it says there's two ways to live, and two ways only. That's it. You can live apart from God in relationship with him, or you can live with him in relationship. But here's the problem. There's a lot of people that when they live outside of relationship with God, they've got life by the tail, they know how to make money, they know how to go places, they know how to do business, they know all that. But here's the problem with that. There's coming a day when the rescue will not be physical. There's coming a day when every single person is utterly and totally and completely helpless. It's called your death. And here's the Son of God, nailed to a cross, as helpless as you can possibly get, literally knows he's dying. And what are his last words? Into your hands I commit my spirit. You know what it means to make God a refuge? It means that you say that by lifestyle. I know what's going on. Trouble has happened. You've got me out of circumstances. You've done all that kind of thing. But every now and then, you are the refuge yourself. And into your hands I commit my spirit. And I've been in deathbeds over and over and over again. I'm telling you, that's real, guys. And you can tell the people who, when they're there, into your hands I commit my spirit, because you're going to get your chance. Your spirit is going to leave your body. And it's going to be the most helpless moment at that point, and that's all you have. And the message is, that's all you have now, technically. You just can't tell circumstantially. So yeah, the trouble's going to happen, but refuge is relationship. Now guys, what we're going to do across our campuses and what we're going to do here at East is we are going to bring the teams back up, and we're going to close out with a time of worship and response in song, because that's what these are. And I want you to think about a couple of things. Number one, do you have some trouble to describe? Describe the trouble. But I want you to think about, have you really committed your spirit to him now, where you're